Alpha King Casimir Volkov had not allowed another living soul within arm's reach in over a decade. His court called him the Iron Wolf, a king carved from cruelty and silence, a man who ruled through fear and spoke through consequences. His personal guards stood no closer than 10 feet from his throne. Servants placed his meals on a table and retreated before he entered. His own generals delivered reports from across the room, voices raised so he could hear without them stepping any closer. No one touched the king. No one sat beside him. No one breathed near him. That was the law of the palace, unwritten, but absolute. So when the entire royal council walked into the war room at dawn for an emergency meeting about the southern border conflict, and found the king lying on the long leather couch with a small Omega woman asleep on his chest, her face buried against his neck, her fingers curled into his shirt, and his arm wrapped around her back holding her in place, the room went completely silent. General Dmitry Aronov, the highest-ranking military officer in the kingdom, stepped forward out of instinct. "Your Majesty," he began, "we have urgent—" Casimir's eyes opened. They were calm, but the calm of a man deciding whether to destroy something. His voice came out low, steady, and lethally quiet. "Wake the Omega on my chest," he said, "and you die." Dmitri froze mid-step. The entire council froze behind him. 12 of the most powerful men and women in the kingdom stood paralyzed, staring at a scene that should have been impossible. The king, who allowed no one within reach, was holding a sleeping woman against his chest like she was the most precious thing in the world. And he had just threatened to execute anyone who disturbed her. The Omega stirred slightly, making a small sound, and Casimir's hand moved instantly to her hair, stroking gently until she settled back into deep sleep. His expression during that moment, tender, careful, devastatingly soft, was something no one in that room had ever witnessed from the Iron Wolf. It lasted only seconds before his face hardened again, and he looked at his council with eyes that promised violence. "You will wait," he said, "all of you, in the corridor, until she wakes on her own." "But Your Majesty," Dmitri tried again, "the southern border—" "Will still be there when she is rested," Casimir interrupted. "She has not slept in 4 days. She collapsed an hour ago and fell asleep here. I will not wake her. I will not allow anyone else to wake her. And if I hear one voice raised loud enough to disturb her, that voice will be the last sound its owner ever makes. Do I make myself clear?" The council retreated in stunned silence, filing into the corridor like scolded children. Behind the closed doors, they exchanged bewildered glances. Who was she? How had she gotten close enough to fall asleep on a king who threatened death for unwanted proximity? And why was the most feared alpha in the kingdom stroking her hair like she was the center of his universe? The answers to those questions would have shocked them even more than the scene they had just witnessed. Because the Omega sleeping on Casimir Volkov's chest was Marisol Delgado, a 24-year-old palace herbalist who had spent the last 4 days saving his life when an assassin's poison should have killed him. She had not eaten, had not slept, had refused to leave his side, even when the other healers gave up and declared him dead. She had fought for him when no one else would. And when the poison finally broke and he opened his eyes at 3 a.m, she was the first face he saw. She had whispered, "Thank the gods you are alive," and then she had collapsed against him from sheer exhaustion, asleep before she even finished falling. He had caught her, pulled her against his chest, and made a decision in that moment that would reshape everything. No one was going to take her from him. Not now. Not ever. The Alpha King warned, "Wake the Omega on my chest and you die." The court thought he had gone mad. They did not know she had just spent 4 days saving his life when everyone else had given up. Chapter 1. 4 days earlier, everything had been normal, or as normal as life got when you were the most overlooked herbalist in the palace. My name is Marisol Delgado, and I had worked in the royal healing rooms for 2 years, mixing remedies and studying poisons under the head healer, a stern beta woman named Inessa Morozova, who took credit for my work and treated me like I was furniture with hands. I was good at what I did. Better than good. I had an instinct for poisons that bordered on supernatural, an ability to identify toxins by smell and taste that Inessa had never seen in her 40 years of practice. But I was Omega. Young, foreign, my family having immigrated from the southern provinces when I was a child, and invisible, which in the palace healing rooms meant that my discoveries were presented by Inessa as her own. My breakthroughs were credited to her genius, and my exhaustion was treated as laziness if I dared to sit down. I had not had a full day off in 7 months. Inessa kept finding reasons to extend my shifts, cancel my rest days, pile on additional duties. Study these samples. Catalog those herbs. Clean the entire dispensary. Rewrite all the remedy logs in neater handwriting. I worked 18-hour days regularly, surviving on stolen naps in the herb storage closet and whatever food I could eat while standing over my workbench. I was burning out, and everyone could see it, except the one person who could have stopped it. But Inessa needed my work to maintain her reputation, so she kept me running until I was hollow. On the night the king was poisoned, I was already at the end of my endurance. I had been awake for 20 hours, cataloging a new shipment of medicinal herbs when the alarm bells rang through the palace. The king has been poisoned. All healers to the royal chambers immediately. I ran with the others, my tired legs barely keeping up. When we arrived, the scene was chaos. King Casimir lay on his bed, unconscious, his skin gray and his breathing shallow. His personal guards stood in a ring around the room, hands on weapons, eyes wild with fear and fury. Someone had poisoned his evening wine. Inessa took charge immediately, barking orders and examining the king with practiced efficiency. She identified the poison as common nightshade and began the standard treatment. But something was wrong. I could smell it even from across the room. The wine smelled like nightshade, yes, but there was something underneath. Something sharper, deadlier. This was not common nightshade. This was something far worse. Inessa, I said carefully, I think there is a secondary toxin. The base smells like nightshade, but there is... I did not ask for your opinion, she snapped without looking at me. Prepare the nightshade antidote. Standard protocol. I did as she ordered, but my instincts screamed that she was wrong. The standard antidote would not work because this was not a standard poison. I kept my mouth shut and prepared what she asked for while secretly taking a sample of the poisoned wine to analyze later. If I was right and she was wrong, the king would die. And if I contradicted her publicly and was wrong, my career was over. The king was poisoned, and the head healer was treating him for the wrong toxin. I knew the truth, but I was too afraid of Inessa to speak up. That fear nearly cost him his life. Chapter 2. 6 hours after the poisoning, Inessa's antidote had done nothing. The king was worse. His skin had gone from gray to almost blue. His breathing was labored. His pulse was fading. The other healers were panicking, and Inessa was barking contradictory orders, her composure cracking as she realized her treatment was failing. She tried a second antidote, then a third. Nothing worked. By midnight, she stepped back from the king's bedside and said the words no one wanted to hear. There is nothing more I can do. The poison is beyond my knowledge. We should prepare the kingdom for succession. The room erupted. General Dmitri demanded more be done. Lord Nikolai Petrovich, the king's closest advisor, called for healers from neighboring kingdoms. Guards argued about security. In the chaos, no one noticed me slip out with my stolen wine sample and rush to the healing rooms. I worked feverishly, testing the sample against every toxin in our reference collection. At 2 a.m, I found it. The secondary toxin was not nightshade at all. It was blackthorn extract, an incredibly rare poison that mimicked nightshade symptoms, but required a completely different antidote. Whoever had poisoned the king had been clever, layering the poisons so that healers would treat for the wrong one, and the blackthorn would kill him, while everyone focused on nightshade. I knew how to make the blackthorn antidote. My grandmother Luciana had been a healer in the southern provinces where blackthorn grew wild. She had taught me the formula when I was 14, warning me that the poison was deadly and the antidote was delicate. One wrong measurement and it would accelerate the poison instead of neutralizing it. I mixed it with shaking hands, measuring each ingredient 3 times to be certain. Then I ran back to the king's chambers. Inessa blocked the door. "What are you doing here?" I told everyone to leave. "I have the antidote," I said breathlessly. "This is not nightshade. It is blackthorn extract with a nightshade masking agent. The nightshade antidote is useless. He needs this." She stared at me with an expression I recognized, the same expression she wore whenever I was right about something, and she had not thought of it first. "That is absurd. There is no blackthorn in this region." "Someone brought it," I said, "specifically to make it look like nightshade, so the standard treatment would fail. Please, Inessa. He is dying. Let me try." She drew herself up. "If you are wrong, you will kill him faster. And I will make sure everyone knows it was your incompetence, not mine." "I know the risk," I said. "But if I do nothing, he dies anyway. At least let me try." She stepped aside, her expression calculating. "Fine. Try. And when it fails, I will have you removed from the healing corps permanently." I had the antidote no one else could have made. Inessa tried to block me, but I refused to let her jealousy kill the king. Chapter 3. I administered the blackthorn antidote with steady hands despite my terror. If I was wrong about the secondary toxin, this formula would kill him within minutes. The room held its breath. General Dmitri stood with his hand on his sword, as if he could fight poison with steel. Lord Nikolai watched with hollow eyes, and Inessa stood in the corner with her arms crossed, already preparing her defense for when I failed. The first hour passed with no change. Inessa smirked. The second hour, I adjusted the dosage slightly, adding a secondary compound my grandmother had used for stubborn cases. Still no visible improvement. Inessa began writing notes, documenting my failure. By the third hour, I was the only one still working. The other healers had retreated. The guards stood vigil at the door. Even Dmitri and Nikolai had stepped out, convinced the king was beyond saving. Only I remained, monitoring his pulse, adjusting the remedy, refusing to accept that he was going to die. I was exhausted, beyond anything I had experienced before. My vision blurred. My hands shook. I had been awake for over 30 hours, but I would not stop. Something in my gut told me the antidote was working, that it just needed time and patience. So I stayed. 12 hours after I administered my antidote, his color began to change. The blue faded from his lips. His breathing deepened. His pulse, which had been thread-thin and fading, grew stronger. I checked and rechecked, terrified I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But it was real. The poison was retreating. I adjusted the dosage one final time and settled in to wait, my body screaming for rest but my mind refusing to leave him. If the poison surged again, he would need immediate intervention. So I sat beside his bed and kept vigil. By the second day, he was clearly improving, but still unconscious. Inessa returned, saw the improvement, and immediately tried to take credit. "I adjusted the formula based on my research," she told Lord Nikolai smoothly. "My apprentice assisted, of course, but the breakthrough was mine." I was too exhausted to argue. I simply continued monitoring the king, adjusting remedies, tracking his recovery. By the third day, I had not slept in over 70 hours. My hands trembled constantly. I could barely see straight. Other healers tried to relieve me, but I refused to leave. If the poison resurged, they would not know what to do. They would use the Nightshade protocol, and he would die. Only I knew the Blackthorn formula. Only I could save him if something went wrong. So I stayed, and I watched, and I fought to keep my eyes open through sheer willpower. 4 days without sleep. 4 days refusing to leave his side. 4 days fighting for a man everyone else had given up on. I would not let him die. Chapter 4. On the 4th night, at 3 in the morning, King Casimir Volkov opened his eyes. I was sitting beside his bed, barely conscious myself, running on nothing but stubbornness and fear. His eyes focused, slowly, adjusting to the dim candlelight. Then they found me. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough from days of unconsciousness. "Your chambers, Your Majesty. You were poisoned. You have been unconscious for 4 days. 4 days. Yes. Who are you?" "I am Marisol, your herbalist. I made the antidote that saved your life." He studied me with eyes that were sharper than they should have been for a man who had nearly died. "You look terrible," he said bluntly. "I have not slept in 4 days," I replied. "Why not?" "Because no one else knows the formula for the blackthorn antidote. If the poison resurged while I was sleeping, and someone else treated you with the nightshade protocol, you would have died. So I stayed." He continued staring at me with that unreadable expression. "You stayed awake for 4 days to save me. A man you have never spoken to. A king who does not allow anyone within 10 feet of him. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? Because you were dying and I could help. That is enough reason." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Thank you, Marisol." Before I could respond, my body finally surrendered. 4 days of sleeplessness, 4 days of stress, 4 days of fighting to keep this man alive. It all crashed into me at once. My vision went black. My legs gave out. I pitched forward and fell directly onto him, my face landing against his chest, my body collapsing across his like a puppet with its strings cut. I was asleep before I even realized I was falling. Later, he told me what happened next. His first instinct was to throw me off. Touch was his enemy, had been for over a decade. The proximity of another person usually sent his body into immediate fight response. His muscles tensed. His breath stopped. The familiar wave of revulsion and panic surged through him. But then, nothing. The panic did not come. The revulsion did not follow. Instead, he felt something he had not experienced in years. Warmth, comfort, safety. My body was small against his, my breathing slow and deep with the sleep of total exhaustion. I was not a threat. I was not trying to take anything from him. I was simply a woman who had spent 4 days saving his life and had finally run out of strength. And somehow, impossibly, his body recognized that. So instead of throwing me off, he did something that would have horrified his court. He wrapped his arm around my back, pulled me closer against his chest, and let me sleep. And for the first time in over a decade, the Iron Wolf held another person and felt peace instead of panic. I collapsed on him from exhaustion, and he held me instead of pushing me away. For the first time in years, touch felt safe to the king who allowed no one close. Chapter 5. That was the scene the council walked into at dawn. The king lying on the couch in the war room. He had moved us there sometime during the night, with a small Omega woman asleep on his chest. And the king's deadly warning, "Wake the Omega on my chest and you die." I slept for 9 hours. 9 uninterrupted, dreamless, perfect hours while the most feared alpha in the kingdom held me and threatened anyone who came near. When I finally woke, it was late afternoon, and the room was silent except for the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. I opened my eyes and immediately froze, realizing where I was. On the king, against his chest, his arm still around my back. I scrambled backward in panic. "Your Majesty, I am so sorry. I did not mean to. I fell and You were asleep and I—" "Stop," he said, and the command in his voice froze me mid-apology. "You needed rest. You earned it. Do not apologize. But I fell on you. You do not allow anyone to—" "I know what I allow," he interrupted, "and I am telling you that I allowed it. I chose to hold you. Do you understand? I chose it. That has not happened in a very long time." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He sat up slowly, still recovering from the poison though his color was vastly improved. 12 years ago, something happened that made me unable to tolerate touch. I will explain it to you in time. For now, What matters is that for 12 years, no one has been able to come near me without triggering a response I cannot control. Guards, healers, family, lovers, all of them trigger the same reaction: revulsion, panic, the need to create distance immediately. But you, when you fell on me last night, that response did not come. I felt your weight against me, and instead of panic, I felt peace. I have not felt peace in 12 years, Marisol. Do you understand what that means? I shook my head, overwhelmed. It means you are safe, he said simply. For reasons I cannot explain, you are the one person in this world whose touch does not hurt me, and I have no intention of letting that go. Now, before we discuss what this means for us, there is another urgent matter. He stood, and his expression shifted from vulnerable to lethal in a heartbeat. Someone in this palace tried to kill me. They used blackthorn extract, a poison so rare that only a handful of people in this kingdom would know how to obtain it. And your head healer, Inessa Morozova, nearly ensured their success by treating me for the wrong poison, despite your correct diagnosis. I need to know if that was incompetence or conspiracy. My blood went cold. You think Inessa was involved? I think it is suspicious, he said, that the head healer misidentified a poison when her own apprentice recognized it immediately. I think it is suspicious that she tried to block you from administering the correct antidote, and I think it is very suspicious that she is now claiming credit for saving my life when she was ready to let me die. I need your help to uncover the truth, Marisol. Your knowledge of poisons may be the only thing that saves us both. He revealed that my touch was the only one that did not hurt him. Then he asked for my help to find whoever tried to murder him. My quiet life as an invisible herbalist was over. Chapter 6. Over the next 2 weeks, Casimir and I worked together to trace the assassination attempt. He kept me close at all times, partly because he needed my expertise with poisons, and partly because, as I came to understand, my presence was the only thing that kept him grounded. When I was near, he could function normally. When I stepped away for too long, the familiar tension crept back into his shoulders. The walls reformed around him, and the Iron Wolf returned. I became his anchor without meaning to, and he became mine. Because for the first time in 2 years, I was valued for my actual skill instead of having my work stolen by someone else. The investigation led us to terrifying places. The blackthorn extract had been purchased through black market channels using funds traced to a private account. That account belonged to Lord Valentin Sorokin, a minor noble with gambling debts and desperate ambitions. But Valentin was not smart enough to plan an assassination alone. Someone had funded him, guided him, told him exactly which poison to use and how to obtain it, and that someone had also ensured that the head healer would misidentify the toxin, guaranteeing the king's death. It was Inessa, I said to Casimir one evening as we reviewed the evidence in his study. She did not just misidentify the poison. She deliberately steered treatment toward the wrong antidote. She knew it was blackthorn. She had to have known. She trained under Grandmother Luciana's rival in the southern provinces. She would have recognized blackthorn by smell alone. Can you prove it? Casimir asked. I can prove she had the knowledge to identify it, I said. And I can prove she actively prevented me from treating you correctly until I forced past her. Combined with Lord Valentin's financial records showing payments from an account connected to her husband's trading company, it builds a compelling case. Casimir stared at the evidence, his expression terrifyingly calm. The woman who was supposed to protect my health conspired to end my life, and the woman she treated like furniture is the one who actually saved it. The irony is not lost on me. She took credit for my work for 2 years, I said quietly. Every formula I developed, every treatment I created, she presented as her own. I was too afraid to challenge her because she had the power to destroy my career. She used me for my talent, and then tried to ensure that talent could not save you, because if it did, her role in the conspiracy would be exposed. Which is exactly what happened, Casimir said. You saved me despite her efforts, and now we know the truth. We uncovered the conspiracy together. Inessa had helped plan his murder and had stolen my work for years. The woman who made me invisible had tried to kill the man who finally saw me. Chapter 7. The arrests happened simultaneously. Lord Valentin Sorokin was taken from his estate at dawn. Inessa Morozova was seized from the healing rooms, where she was already rewriting history, to position herself as the king's savior. Both were brought before the king's court in chains. Casimir sat on his throne with me beside him, a position that raised every eyebrow in the room. No one stood beside the Iron Wolf. No one stood within 10 feet. Yet there I was, close enough to touch him, and he was not just tolerating it, but seemed calmer for my presence. The evidence was presented methodically. Lord Valentin confessed almost immediately, sobbing about debts and promises of wealth. Inessa was harder. She maintained her innocence with icy composure until I took the stand. I presented the poison analysis proving the blackthorn had been deliberately masked with nightshade. I presented records of Inessa's training in the southern provinces, where blackthorn was common knowledge. I presented her own notes from the night of the poisoning, where she had written blackthorn with a question mark and then crossed it out, choosing to treat for nightshade instead. She could have saved you that first night, I told the court. She identified blackthorn as a possibility in her own handwriting and chose to ignore it, because saving you was never her intention. Inessa's composure finally cracked. "You ungrateful little nothing," she spat at me. "I gave you a position, I trained you, and you repay me by destroying me?" "You stole my work," I replied calmly. "You took credit for every formula I created. You worked me to exhaustion for 2 years and treated me like I was worthless. And then you tried to ensure that the one time my knowledge truly mattered, it would not be used. You would have let the king die and blamed your failure on the poison being unidentifiable. You would have let me take the fall somehow. Because that is what you do. You use people and discard them." Casimir stood. "Inessa Morozova, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Lord Valentin Sorokin, you are found guilty of the same. You will both face the full consequences of your crimes." He turned to the court. "And let this serve as notice that the woman standing beside me, Marisol Delgado, is the sole reason I am alive. She identified the correct poison. She created the antidote no one else could make. She stayed awake for 4 days, refusing to leave my side when every other healer, including the one who was supposed to protect me, had given up. From this day forward, she holds the position of royal herbalist, answering only to me. Anyone who mistreats her, undermines her, or steals her work will answer directly to the crown." He looked at me, and his expression softened in a way the court had never seen. "Is that acceptable to you?" I could barely speak through the tears I was fighting. "Yes, Your Majesty. That is acceptable." The conspirators were exposed, Inessa's theft of my work was laid bare, and the king gave me the recognition I had been denied for years. Chapter 8. In the weeks that followed, Casimir and I grew closer in ways I had never imagined. He told me the truth about why touch was painful for him, a bonding ceremony gone wrong years ago that had left him unable to tolerate physical contact without overwhelming distress. He had lived in isolation for over a decade, untouched, unreached, alone behind walls he had built to protect himself from pain that no one understood. But my touch was different. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was because I had saved his life. Perhaps it was because I had approached him without agenda, without desire for power or position. Perhaps it was simply something inexplicable between us. Whatever the reason, I was the only person whose touch brought peace instead of pain. We developed rituals, morning tea together where our hands would brush and he would not flinch, evening walks in the gardens where I would take his arm and he would lean into me instead of pulling away, nights when the isolation became too heavy and he would find me in the herbalist rooms, sit beside me, and simply exist in my proximity. Each touch was a small victory. Each moment of closeness was proof that he was healing from wounds no one had been able to reach. One evening, a month after the assassination attempt, we sat together in the garden as sunset painted the sky. "You changed everything," he said quietly. "How?" I asked. "Before you fell asleep on my chest, I had accepted that I would live my entire life without being touched, without being close to anyone, without knowing what it felt like to hold someone and feel safe. I had accepted that the iron wolf was all I would ever be. Cold, distant, untouchable. And then you collapsed on me from sheer exhaustion, and suddenly everything I thought was permanent turned out to be something that could change." I reached out and took his hand. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, a man savoring something he had been denied for 12 years. "Marisol," he said without opening his eyes. "Yes?" "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Not as your king, but as a man who is terrified of the answer. All right, could you love me? Not the crown, not the title. Me, Casimir. The man who cannot be touched by anyone except you. The man who threatens people for getting too close. The man who has been alone for so long, he barely remembers how to be human. Could you love that man?" I squeezed his hand. "I already do," I said. "I fell in love with you while you were unconscious, and I was fighting to keep you alive. I fell deeper when you held me while I slept instead of pushing me away. I fell completely when you stood in front of your entire court and told them I mattered. I love you, Casimir. Not the king, not the Iron Wolf. The man who strokes my hair when I sleep and threatens generals who speak too loudly. That is the man I love." He pulled me close, wrapping both arms around me, burying his face in my hair. The gesture that would have been impossible a month ago was now the most natural thing in the world. "I want to marry you," he murmured against my hair, "not for politics or alliances, because you are the only person in this world who makes me feel human. Will you marry me, Marisol? Will you be my peace?" "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I will be your peace." He asked me to marry him in the garden at sunset, and I said yes to the man who had been untouchable until I fell asleep on his chest and changed everything. Epilogue 2 years later. The court still talked about the morning General Dmitry Aronov walked into the war room and found the Iron Wolf holding a sleeping Omega like she was made of glass. They talked about the deadly calm in his voice when he said, "Wake the Omega on my chest, and you die." They talked about how the most feared Alpha King in history had been brought to his knees by a 24-year-old herbalist who had simply refused to let him die. What they did not talk about, because they could not understand it, was how profoundly that moment had changed everything. Not just for Casimir and me, but for the entire kingdom. After our marriage, Casimir slowly began to tolerate touch from others. Not comfortably, not easily, but the absolute barrier that had existed for 12 years began to soften. He could shake hands with diplomats. He could accept embraces from his closest friends. He could hold our daughter, born 1 year after our wedding, without fear. Healers said I had somehow reset his association with touch, replacing years of pain with the experience of safety. I did not understand the science of it. I just knew that love had done what medicine could not. I restructured the entire royal healing program, ensuring that herbalists and healers received proper credit for their work. Inessa's system of exploitation was dismantled. I established training programs for young healers from disadvantaged backgrounds, especially Omegas who were often overlooked. My grandmother Luciana's remedies, which Inessa had planned to bury along with me, became the foundation of a new approach to poison treatment that saved hundreds of lives across the kingdom. One morning, 2 years after the poisoning, I found Casimir in the war room, the same room where the council had found us that dawn. He was standing by the couch, running his hand over the leather with a slight smile. "Remembering?" I asked. "Always," he said. "This couch is where everything changed, where the Iron Wolf became just Casimir, where a terrified king held a sleeping woman and felt peace for the first time in 12 years. I walked to him and pressed myself against his chest, exactly as I had fallen that night. He wrapped his arms around me and held me close. "You know," he murmured, "if you fall asleep right now, I will cancel every meeting I have today." "I might have to test that threat," I teased. Our daughter Katya toddled in, interrupting us with the supreme confidence of a 2-year-old who owned the world. "Papa, hold!" she demanded, raising her arms. Casimir released me and scooped her up, settling her against his chest exactly where I had slept that first night. She curled against him and closed her eyes, instantly content. He looked at me over her head, and the expression on his face, tender, overwhelmed, grateful, was the same one the council had glimpsed 2 years ago and could not believe. "She falls asleep on you, just like I did," I said. "She does," he agreed, "and anyone who wakes her answers to me." General Dmitri, who had been approaching the doorway with reports in hand, heard this and immediately turned on his heel, retreating down the corridor. I laughed. The Iron Wolf strikes again. Casimir smiled, holding his sleeping daughter, looking at me with eyes full of everything he had been denied for 12 years. Love, touch, peace, family. "Not the Iron Wolf," he said. "Just a man who finally found his home. The Alpha King warned, 'Wake the Omega on my chest, and you die.' 2 years later, his daughter slept on that same chest. His wife stood beside him, and the Iron Wolf had become simply a man who had found his peace. All because one exhausted herbalist refused to let him die, collapsed from sheer stubbornness, and taught a king who could not be touched that love was worth the risk.